When I look into the faces before me, I sense a collective fatigue, the exhaustion of those who have carried burdens that were never theirs to bear. You who have borne the shadow of another know this intimately. The weight of unspoken rage, the chains of unshed tears, the wounds of stories that were not your own, the empath, that fragile yet resilient soul, becomes the silent graveyard of the narcissist's unacknowledged darkness. And yet, paradoxically, in carrying this burden, you are also standing at the threshold of your own rebirth. A dark rebirth that is both terrifying and liberating. Let us walk together into this mystery, not with fear, but with the deep curiosity of the soul that longs to awaken. To be an empath is not simply to feel deeply, it is to become a vessel in which the energies of others swim like restless fish in a bowl. It is to be porous, to absorb without resistance, to stand as if naked in a storm. When such a soul meets the narcissist, the archetype of hollow grandiosity, there is a fateful encounter. The one who refuses to feel finds the one who cannot help but feel. Like alchemical opposites, they are drawn together, yet the transformation is never mutual. The narcissist sees in the empath a reservoir, a psychic sponge to absorb the shadow that he cannot face. And the empath, often unconsciously, accepts this role, mistaking it for love, mistaking suffering for loyalty, mistaking enmeshment for destiny. But let us not think of this only in the personal sense. Behind every such relationship stands an archetypal drama. Older than time itself, imagine Persephone, abducted into the underworld, carrying the weight of Hades' kingdom within her fragile form. Imagine Inanna descending naked through the 7 gates, stripped of all power until she stands in the abyss. This is the story the empath lives, a descent into the other's darkness, a carrying of what is unbearable until one forgets where the other ends and the self begins. The narcissist projects the unbearable shadow, the rage, the fear of insignificance, the emptiness that gnaws like a bottomless hunger, and the empath drinks it in as though it were her own blood. And in that moment, she begins to lose her outline, her own soul becoming blurred. This dark exchange cannot last forever. The psyche has its own laws, and one of them is that what is repressed must surface, what is borrowed must be returned, and what is falsely carried must eventually be released. This is why I call it a dark rebirth. For the empath who has carried too much, there comes a breaking point. Dreams begin to stir with images of devouring beasts, of overflowing rivers, of strangers. Wearing one's face, nightmares rise, not to torment but to remind. The unconscious whispers, "These shadows you carry are not yours. Return them, birth yourself anew." In my analytic work, I have seen this many times. The woman who has lived 20 years beneath the tyranny of her husband's criticism comes with trembling hands and a quiet voice. She tells me she does not know who she is anymore. And yet, when we enter her dreams, we find a raging lioness clawing at the bars of a cage, her eyes burning with fire. This lioness is her own soul, long imprisoned by the projections she has absorbed. The empath must allow the lioness to break free, even if it means the cage of the relationship shatters. This is not cruelty. It is life. It is the sacred moment when the empath realizes what I thought was compassion was, in truth, captivity. What I thought was loyalty was, in truth, self-abandonment. And what I thought was love was, in truth, the carrying of a shadow that never belonged to me. You see, the empath's sensitivity is both gift and curse. It is an antenna tuned to the collective unconscious, capable of perceiving subtleties that others miss, but without boundaries. This antenna becomes a trap, pulling in every frequency of pain and distortion. The narcissist's shadow is particularly magnetic because it resonates with the empath's hidden wound, the archetype of the wounded child who once carried a parent's grief, anger, or unmet needs. The empath is not chosen by accident. The empath has already been trained in the art of carrying another's shadow, often since childhood. Thus, when the narcissist arrives, it feels strangely familiar, as though destiny has brought them together. In truth, it is not destiny but repetition, the psyche seeking to resolve what was never healed. Yet even in this repetition lies the seed of transformation. For when the empath finally breaks, when the weight becomes unbearable, a new self begins to surface. This is the dark rebirth. It is not the gentle rebirth of spring blossoms. It is the violent cracking of an egg, the scream of a newborn torn from the womb, the fire of the phoenix consuming itself in ashes. It is terrifying because it feels like death, and indeed it is a death, the death of the false self, the death of the role of shadow carrier, the death of the illusion that love requires suffering. Out of this death, a new archetype emerges, not the silent sponge, but the awakened sovereign of the self. I must tell you, this rebirth is not without resistance. The narcissist, sensing the loss of his shadow bearer, may grow frantic, like a drowning man clutching at anything to keep afloat. He will accuse, he will manipulate, he will promise, he will rage. He cannot survive without a mirror, without someone to absorb his darkness. But the empath who is awakening begins to see through these tactics. For the first time, she feels the difference between what is hers and what is not. She feels the stirring of a boundary, a sacred circle around her soul. And though it feels unnatural at first, though guilt and fear gnaw at her, she begins to refuse, to say no, to return the shadows to their rightful owner. This is the moment of initiation. It is as if the empath steps into a ritual fire, allowing all false identities to burn away. The ashes cling, the smoke blinds, yet in the heart of the flame, a new figure is forged in dreams. This may appear as a warrior rising from the battlefield, bloodied but alive, or as a child emerging from the ruins, holding a single unbroken candle. These are not fantasies. They are messages from the unconscious, symbols of the new self being born, and the empath, once a silent carrier, becomes something else, a witness of truth, a guardian of her own soul, a participant in the archetypal dance of death and rebirth. Do not misunderstand. This is not the end of suffering. Rebirth is not an escape, but a transformation. The empath will still feel, but she will no longer confuse another's shadow for her own. She will still love, but she will no longer love at the cost of her soul. She will still carry, but what she carries will be chosen, not imposed. And in this new freedom, she begins to taste something she has never known, the sweetness of authenticity, the peace of being herself, unblurred, unbroken, unburdened. The collective need for this transformation is immense. In our age, narcissism proliferate like a plague, and empaths are its silent victims. But what if every empath who carried a narcissist's shadow chose instead to undergo the dark rebirth? What if, instead of becoming graves for unacknowledged pain, they became midwives of truth, returning shadows to their owners and standing in the fullness of their own being? The world would tremble, for the archetype of the silent sufferer would vanish, replaced by the archetype of the awakened soul. And so, my friends, I invite you into the fire. Do not resist the breaking. Do not fear the lioness within. Do not cling to the role of carrier, for it is not your destiny to drown in another's abyss. Your destiny is to rise, to emerge from the ashes, to be reborn in the truth of who you are. This is the empath's dark rebirth, and it is the most sacred gift hidden within the shadow you once bore. The empath who stands at the threshold of this transformation often finds herself caught between two worlds. One is the familiar prison where she has always lived, carrying another's unspoken grief like a second skin, feeling responsible for every storm in the atmosphere of those she loves. The other is the unknown expanse of her own soul, a vast territory, uncharted, calling her with a voice that is both terrifying and tender. This moment is what I have often described as the confrontation with the unconscious. It is not merely an inner experience. It manifests in the body, in dreams, in synchronicities that shake the very ground beneath one's life. The narcissist has long functioned as a mirror, but it is a false mirror. He reflects not the true self of the empath, but a distortion, a funhouse glass in which guilt, obligation, and shame are magnified until they appear to be one's identity. When this mirror shatters, it feels like death, for the empath no longer knows who she is without the reflection she has lived inside. Yet, this very shattering opens the door to the true mirror, the mirror of the unconscious, where archetypes emerge not to enslave, but to guide. In dreams, this shift is dramatic. the narcissist figure may appear monstrous, bloated, or fading into nothingness, while behind him emerges a figure of light, an inner guide, sometimes terrifying in its clarity. What surfaces in this moment is not merely freedom from another shadow, but the reawakening of one's own shadow. The parts of the self that were hidden while all energy was devoted to absorbing the other. The empath may discover rage. She never allowed herself to feel hunger for power. She had disowned a wildness she had concealed behind gentleness. This is shocking because the empath often prides herself on being pure, compassionate, endlessly forgiving. To meet her own shadow feels like betrayal of that identity. Yet here lies the paradox. Only by reclaiming her own darkness can she stop being a carrier of another's. For what we disown in ourselves, we inevitably carry for others. This confrontation with the shadow is always archetypal. In myth, it appears as the hero meeting the monster, the goddess facing her underworld twin, the seeker finding the dragon, guarding the treasure. For the empath, the monster may be her own repressed anger, the underworld twin, her desire to be seen without pleasing, the dragon, her fear of abandonment. Each of these must be faced, not banished. The shadow is not an enemy to destroy, but a part of the soul to be integrated. This is the essence of individuation, becoming whole, not perfect, uniting light and darkness in a living tension. Yet the empath is tempted to flee from this encounter. She may long to return to her role as savior, to lose herself again in the narcissist's demands. Simply because it is familiar, the psyche clings to what is known, even if it is destructive. The dark rebirth requires immense courage, for it asks the empath to risk solitude, to endure the burning guilt of saying no, to stand naked without the mask of endless giving. It asks her to walk away from the role that once defined her. This is why many delay, circling for years in relationships that suffocate them, whispering excuses about loyalty or hope. But beneath those excuses lies fear, fear of who they will become when no longer chained to another's shadow. To pass through this fear, one must embrace symbols, for the language of the unconscious is symbolic. When an empath dreams of drowning, it is not merely despair, it is a call to breathe her own air. When she dreams of snakes shedding their skin, it is an invitation to release the old identity. When she dreams of standing before a locked door, the key is not in the narcissist's hand, but in her own pocket, waiting to be discovered. By attending to these images, by listening to their strange wisdom, the empath learns to trust the unconscious, to follow its guidance even when it contradicts reason. In analysis, I have seen the miraculous unfold when this trust is honored. A patient once told me of a dream in which she was buried beneath a mountain of black stones. She awoke gasping, convinced she was suffocating. Yet, when we explored the dream, she discovered that the stones were not crushing her, but protecting her, shielding her from a storm above. The shadow she thought was death became a womb A month later, she found the courage to end a relationship that had drained her for decades. The stones had been her strength, her buried solidity, waiting to be acknowledged. The empath's dark rebirth is precisely this, the recognition that what seemed destructive is in truth the source of power. The narcissist shadow, once absorbed, awakens the empath's own shadow. And the empath, by ceasing to carry what is not hers, becomes capable of carrying what is hers with dignity. This is the profound alchemy, transforming poison into medicine, captivity into sovereignty, suffering into wisdom. The collective dimension of this cannot be ignored. Empaths are not merely individuals, they are expressions of an archetype that humanity desperately needs. In a world fractured by greed and domination, the empath is the reminder that the soul exists, that the pain of one is felt by all. Yet if empaths remain imprisoned by narcissists, their gift becomes their wound. Their sensitivity becomes exploitation. The world loses their light, for it is smothered beneath another's shadow. Only through rebirth can the empath fulfill her archetypal role, not as silent carrier, but as conscious healer, not as victim, but as visionary. This is why the empath's rebirth is not private, it is collective. Each time one soul breaks free, an ancient pattern shifts. The archetype of the silent sufferer weakens. The archetype of the awakened one strengthens. Humanity itself edges closer to balance. Think of it. Every empath who reclaims her shadow becomes a torchbearer, illuminating paths for others. She speaks words others did not dare to speak. She embodies boundaries others thought impossible. She lives authenticity that radiates courage into the collective unconscious, and in this way, the cycle of carrying another's shadow is broken not only personally but culturally. But the path is long, and there are dangers. The empath who discovers her shadow may swing to the opposite extreme, becoming hardened, rejecting sensitivity altogether, mistaking numbness for strength. This is not integration, but reaction. True integration requires holding both the tenderness of the heart and the fierceness of the shadow. It is a dance, not a war. The empath learns to feel without absorbing, to love without losing, to give without erasing. She becomes a vessel, not for another's shadow, but for her own wholeness. As this process deepens, synchronicities appear, strange coincidences that feel like whispers of destiny. The empath who has always silenced her voice suddenly finds herself invited to speak before a group. The one who has always feared abandonment meets friends who cherish her authenticity. These are not accidents. They are the psyche aligning with its true pattern. The unconscious, once burdened with another's shadow, now collaborates with the conscious self, guiding life with mysterious precision. And so the empath begins to live a new life. She is not free from pain, for no life is free from pain, but her pain is hers, not borrowed. Her struggles are authentic, not imposed, and in this authenticity lies joy, a joy unlike the fleeting highs of pleasing or rescuing. It is the joy of existing as oneself, of standing rooted in one's own soul, of belonging to the mystery of life without apology. My friends, do you see how profound this is? What seemed at first to be the greatest curse, the entanglement with the narcissist, becomes the very path of initiation. The shadow that once enslaved becomes a doorway to liberation. The empath's descent into another's abyss becomes the catalyst for her ascent into her own soul. This is the rhythm of the archetypes, the eternal pattern of death and rebirth. And so I say to you, if you find yourself still carrying shadows that are not yours, do not despair. The weight you feel is also the invitation to awaken. The darkness you endure is also the womb of transformation. Trust the process, for the psyche is wise beyond your comprehension. Trust the images that come in dreams, the symbols that stir in your depths, the synchronicities that guide your steps. They are the language of your rebirth. The empath's journey into this dark rebirth is never linear. It unfolds in waves, sometimes subtle, sometimes cataclysmic, as though the psyche itself insists upon rhythm. You may feel as if you are advancing into clarity only to be pulled backward into despair. This is not regression, but the circular nature of transformation. The soul does not move in straight lines, it moves in spirals, returning to old wounds with new vision, circling deeper into mystery, until at last the pattern is transcended. At the heart of this process lies the question of identity. For so long, the empath's identity has been shaped by the shadows she carried. She has believed herself to be weak when she was simply exhausted. She has believed herself to be selfless when she was, in truth, Era said, she has believed herself to be loyal when she was bound by chains, invisible but unyielding. To strip these illusions away is to stand before a void, the terrifying emptiness where one's true self has yet to be born. This is why many hesitate, clinging to the familiar pain rather than entering the unknown. For the void feels like annihilation, and the human psyche trembles before it. But this void is sacred. It is the same emptiness the mystics speak of, the nothingness from which creation itself arises. In the dark silence, where the old identity has collapsed, the seeds of the true self lie dormant, waiting. If you can endure the void without rushing to fill it with another's shadow, another's demands, another's illusions, then you will witness something miraculous, the soul beginning to speak in its own voice. This voice is faint at first, like a whisper beneath the noise of the world. Yet if you listen, if you honor it, it grows stronger until it becomes the guiding melody of your life. The empath, learning to hear this voice, often discovers something shocking, a hunger for life that was long suppressed. Beneath the years of carrying others, she finds desires. She had buried desires for freedom, for creativity, for love that does not suffocate. These desires are not selfish. They are the life force of the soul. To deny them is to deny existence itself. And so the empath begins to awaken not only to who she is, but to what she longs for. She begins to claim, to reach, to create. The hands that once clutched another's shadow open to shape her own destiny. Yet there is danger here too. For desire, once unleashed, can become overwhelming. Like a river, long dammed, suddenly breaking free, the empath may swing to extremes, abandoning all sensitivity, becoming reckless in her pursuit of selfhood. But this too is part of the spiral. Every swing, every imbalance is the soul searching for its center. Do not fear these extremes. They are not failures, but necessary movements. Slowly, through trial and error, through sorrow and joy, the empath learns balance, to feel without drowning, to love without erasing, to stand firm without hardening. Dreams remain the compass in this process. I recall a patient who dreamed of a forest filled with mirrors hanging from the trees. In each mirror, she saw a different version of herself: child, warrior, priestess, beggar, queen. She wandered in confusion, unsure which was real, but in the dream's climax, she lifted a stone and shattered every mirror, until only the living forest remained. She awoke, trembling, yet free. The dream had spoken. You are not the reflection in another's eyes. You are the life that moves beneath the roots and branches of your own soul. Such dreams are not fantasies. They are revelations. They guide the rebirth more surely than reason ever could. At this stage, many empaths encounter anger, raw, untamed, long denied. It rises like a storm, shocking in its intensity. For years, anger had been buried beneath patience, beneath forgiveness, beneath the compulsion to understand, but the shadow does not vanish. It waits, and when it surfaces, it can be frightening. The empath, who has always seen herself as kind, may suddenly feel murderous rage, fantasies of destruction, an inner fire that threatens to consume her. This is the shadow's gift. Do not suppress it. Do not indulge it blindly. Enter into dialogue with it. Ask, what are you protecting? What truth have you carried for me? You will find that beneath the rage lies power, the fierce insistence of the soul that it must no longer be enslaved. To integrate this anger is to reclaim one's fire, to transform it into boundary, into clarity, into courage. This is why I have always said, no tree can grow to heaven unless its roots reach down to hell. The empath, if she is to be reborn, must allow her roots to sink into her own darkness, to embrace the depths of rage, desire, grief, and fear. Only then can she rise without being toppled by every wind. The narcissist, in refusing his own shadow, remains forever shallow, bound to the surface, enslaved by the need for others to carry what he cannot face. But the empath, by embracing her own shadow, gains depth, authenticity, and resilience. This is the great reversal. The one who seemed fragile becomes strong, while the one who seemed powerful remains hollow. And yet, the empath must beware of contempt, for once freed, she may look back on the narcissist with bitterness, despising the years lost, the wounds inflicted. This bitterness is natural, but it is not the final truth. To dwell in contempt is to remain chained to the other, defined by opposition rather than freedom. True liberation comes when the empath can see the narcissist not with hatred, but with clarity. As an archetype, a wounded soul, trapped in his own prison, incapable of transformation until he chooses to face his own shadow. Compassion may remain, but it is no longer entangling. It does not pull the empath back into the abyss. It is compassion at a distance, compassion with boundaries. Compassion that says, I see you, but I no longer carry you. This stance is revolutionary. It is the birth of sovereignty. The empath, once consumed by the shadows of others, now becomes luminous with her own presence. She radiates a different energy, not the sweetness of self-erasure, but the magnetism of authenticity. Others feel it. Some are drawn, some are repelled, for authenticity unsettles as much as it inspires, but it no longer matters. The empath is no longer defined by reaction. She belongs to herself. This moment in the journey often coincides with what I have called individuation, the process by which one becomes whole, unique, and aligned with the self. The archetype of totality within the empath, in reclaiming her shadow and her boundaries, aligns with this deeper center. Life itself begins to take on new meaning. What once felt like endless repetition becomes revelation. Even suffering acquires depth, for it is no longer meaningless endurance, but part of the dance of becoming. Joy emerges not as fleeting pleasure, but as the radiance of living in truth. And this, my friends, is why I call it a rebirth. The empath does not merely recover from pain, she is transformed by it. The one who entered the fire is not the one who emerges. She carries the scars, yes, but they shine like sacred markings, proof of passage, symbols of power. She has died to illusion and been born to authenticity, and in this authenticity lies a beauty beyond description, the beauty of a soul that has carried shadows, descended into the abyss, and risen radiant with her own light. When the empath crosses this final threshold, she discovers that what once defined her existence now feels like a distant dream. The echoes of the narcissist's shadow no longer dominate her nights. The inner landscape has shifted. She begins to notice silence where once there was chaos, stillness where once there was turmoil, and yet this silence is not emptiness. It is the fertile ground of the soul, the soil in which the seeds of her true being have been planted. It is a silence that hums, alive with potential, alive with mystery. At first, she may resist this stillness, for she has been conditioned to live in constant reaction, The absence of another's demands feels strange, even unbearable. The psyche longs for what is familiar, even if it is destructive. Yet, if she remains, if she sits in the stillness without rushing to fill it, something extraordinary happens. The self begins to rise, the self, that archetypal center of the psyche, the hidden God image within, emerges as a guiding presence. It speaks not in words, but in symbols, synchronicities, and subtle impulses. It reveals itself in dreams of radiant figures, in sudden moments of insight, in the uncanny alignment of events. The empath, once enslaved to another's shadow, now discovers she is guided by something infinitely greater, something within yet beyond herself. This is the essence of individuation. It is not the achievement of perfection, nor the escape from suffering, but the alignment of the personality with the self, the surrender of the ego to the deeper wisdom of the soul. For the empath, this alignment feels like a new birth, because her life is no longer organized around survival or servitude. It is organized around truth, and truth, once tasted, cannot be forgotten. In this stage, the empath often feels as if she is inhabiting a new body. The boundaries that once felt impossible now arise naturally. She says no without trembling. She withdraws without guilt. She offers without erasure. Her very energy has changed. And those around her feel it. Some will celebrate it. Others will recoil. The narcissist, if he still lingers in her orbit, will rage at the loss of control, but his rage no longer penetrates. It falls like arrows against a shield, powerless. For the empath has discovered that her shield is not made of hardness, but of authenticity. The truth of her being protects her, because truth cannot be manipulated, cannot be enslaved. And yet, the rebirth is not only defensive, it is creative. The empath, freed from the burden of carrying another's shadow, now has energy for creation. She may discover talents long suppressed, dreams long abandoned, passion long forgot. She begins to paint, to write, to sing, to build. She begins to shape a life that reflects her essence rather than another's demands. This creativity is not optional. It is the natural expression of the soul once liberated. For every soul longs to create, to bring forth from within something that did not exist before. The empath, once emptied, now overflows. This overflowing is not without sorrow, for with every new creation comes the grief of what was lost, the years sacrificed, the self abandoned, the love distorted. The empath must grieve, must allow the tears to flow like rivers through her inner landscape. But this grief is no longer suffocating. It is cleansing. It is the rain that waters the soil, allowing new life to grow. In time, the grief itself becomes a source of depth, a reminder of the cost of authenticity, a testimony to the resilience of the soul. The archetypal dimension of this journey becomes clear. The empath, in her rebirth, embodies the hero's descent and return, the goddess's death and resurrection, the eternal cycle of transformation, she becomes not only herself, but also a symbol for others. Her story carries collective weight, for it mirrors the transformation humanity itself must undergo in a world addicted to narcissism, power without depth, image without substance, domination without responsibility. The empath's rebirth is a prophetic sign. It declares that depth is possible, authenticity is possible, wholeness is possible. It announces that the shadow can be faced, not merely projected, and that in facing it, one discovers not destruction, but renewal. This is why the empath's dark rebirth is so urgently needed. Without it, the empath remains a silent victim, and the narcissist remains unchecked. With it, a new archetype enters the collective imagination, the awakened empath, the soul who feels deeply yet stands firmly, who loves fiercely yet freely, who embodies both tenderness and power. This archetype challenges the collective imbalance, calling humanity back to the wisdom of the heart without the slavery of shadow carrying. As the empath continues on this path, she discovers that the rebirth is not a single event, but an ongoing process. Again and again, she will be asked to descend into her own depths, to face new shadows, to release old identities. Each time, the process feels like death, yet each time it yields new life. The spiral continues, drawing her ever closer to the center, ever deeper into the mystery of the self. There is no final arrival, no permanent state of perfection. There is only the dance of becoming, the eternal interplay of light and darkness, death and rebirth. And so, my friends, I say to you, do not fear the darkness. Do not despise the shadows you have carried, for within them lies the seed of your transformation. Do not regret the years lost, for they have prepared the ground of your soul. Do not cling to the false self, for its death is the gateway to your truth. Trust the process, even when it feels like fire. Trust the symbols, even when they defy reason. Trust the self, for it is the eternal guide within you, the hidden center of your being. You who have carried the shadows of others, hear this: you were never weak. You were chosen by life itself to embody sensitivity, to feel what others could not. And though this sensitivity has wounded you, it is also the source of your rebirth. You are not condemned to remain a vessel for another's darkness. You are invited to become a vessel for your own wholeness, your own light. This is the empath's dark rebirth, and it is not the end of your story. It is the beginning. Imagine yourself standing now in a circle of fire. The shadows you once carried burn around you, rising as smoke into the night. You are stripped bare, but you are not destroyed. You are reborn, clothed, not in illusion, but in authenticity. You step out of the fire, radiant, scarred, alive. The world awaits you not as a carrier of burdens, but as a bearer of truth. Walk into that world, speak your truth, live your wholeness, and know that in doing so, you serve not only yourself, but the collective. For your rebirth is the world's rebirth. Your liberation is humanity's hope. This, my beloved listeners, is the mystery of the empath's dark rebirth. It is what surfaces after carrying a narcissist's shadow. It is the phoenix rising, the goddess ascending, the child of the soul awakening. It is the deepest truth I can offer you, spoken not as doctrine, but as living experience, not as theory, but as vision. Carry it with you, not as a burden, but as a blessing, and may it remind you in every dark night of the soul that rebirth waits in the shadows, that wholeness waits in the depths, that the self waits to guide you home.